I don't really know how to start off this review, because despite what I think about this movie, Treasure Planet is objectively a failure. Not just any failure either. Treasure Planet is one of the biggest failures of all time. Against a $140 million budget, it managed to get back a little bit more than $100 million worldwide. This places it in the top 100 poorest theatrical performances of all time. Treasure Planet was released in 2002, and the early 2000s was a special time in the world of animated cinema. Throughout the 90s, Disney had a golden era of beautiful and highly acclaimed films, but towards the end of that decade, their luck was running out. Their fall started sometime around Pocahontas, which Disney thought would be their big blockbuster of that year. It disappointed, and the films afterwards had an even bigger trouble finding an audience, at least at the time. While The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Hercules were box office successes, they didn't have the cultural staying power or high acclaim of their earlier hits like The Little Mermaid and Aladdin, and especially Beauty and the Beast, and especially The Lion King. You might not know this, but The Hunchback of Notre Dame is the only film in the Disney Animated Canon that has actually been nominated for a Razzie Award. And keep in mind, I'm talking about at the time. Many of these films that I'm talking about are well loved today. I love both Hercules and Notre Dame. Notre Dame is my favorite of the Disney Animated Canon. But back then, the story was quite a bit different. Disney was still pulling in a profit with their films, but each of their movies started becoming more and more either critical disappointments like with Atlantis or Dinosaur, or financial disappointments with Fantasia 2000. Then Treasure Planet comes out. Critics are not kind to it. Even today, the film has a 69% on Rotten Tomatoes, which isn't awful, it's still rated fresh, but it's much more middling than you'd expect from a Disney film. History is made of great successes and great failures, and Treasure Planet is one of those great failures, because due to its failure, it changed history. The early 2000s, there was another big phenomenon that was rocking the world of animation. Yeah, the big green booger himself. Well, not just him. 3D animated films were what was hot. They were the movies that ended up being a success, while Disney was entering a fallow period with their 2D animation. DreamWorks was lighting the world on fire with their Shrek films, and Pixar was picking up where the Disney Renaissance left off. Today, Shrek is seen as a bit of a meme. People like the movies, but he's more of a joke on the internet than seen as some sort of high-quality thing. Which, yes, is starting to change in the 2020s, but that is nothing compared to how Shrek was seen in the early 2000s. If you weren't there at the turn of the millennium, you simply don't know how big of a cultural force that Shrek was. Back in the day, him and his films were some of the most recognizable characters out there, and DreamWorks merchandised the hell out of him. No one believes me when I say this, but DreamWorks sold purple and green Shrek ketchup, and my family actually bought this stuff, and I still haven't forgiven them because nobody on Earth wants to eat green ketchup. I also had Toy Story toys growing up, and played the Finding Nemo video game. Even movies that I tore apart on this channel like Shark Tale and Chicken Little did amazingly well. If not critically, then commercially. No, seriously, this film doubled its money. And like I said, Shark Tale was nominated for Best Animated Picture. All of this set up the stage for change, and when Treasure Planet bombed, Disney was convinced the 2D animation was on its way out. They finished up their last 2D films in production, Brother Bear and Home on the Range, and they decided to close their 2D animation department for good. They opened it briefly at the end of the decade to do Princess and the Frog, but with the exception of 2011's Winnie the Pooh, this is a decision that Disney seems to have stuck with, as well as much of the industry. There isn't very much domestic 2D animation anymore, and most of it seems to come from independent projects. But can any one film, regardless of its quality, be blamed for basically burying an entire medium underground? I mean, if you've even seen the title of this video, you know what I think of Treasure Planet, but let's really talk about it. Very few Disney films from the 2000s became cultural phenomena at the time. They were largely overlooked back then. However, as the years went on, many of these films like Lilo and Stitch, Atlantis: The Lost Empire, and especially The Emperor's New Groove, managed to spark a high regard with the people who watched them as a kid when they started using the internet and talking about their fondness and nostalgia for those films. I'm one of the first people who went in depth with going into really why I liked Meet the Robinsons, and thought that it was a good and even an inspiring film. Before I made that video, no one really talked about it. Treasure Planet has not gotten that treatment, as of yet. Even people who talk fondly about movies they find underrated tend not to get the appeal of Treasure Planet. They tend to have quite a few hang-ups with the film, whether it be the setting or the characters. And I don't mean to call anyone out on this. We've all got our own tastes, and no one is going to like everything. I can fully understand why people don't like Soul, for instance, which is currently my favorite film of all time. And just because Treasure Planet is in my top 3 Disney movies doesn't mean that everyone has to like it. Did I stutter? In the Disney Animated Canon, Treasure Planet is in my top 3. I find Treasure Planet better than Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, Aladdin, and just about any other Disney film you can throw at me. The only one in this canon that I can definitively say are better than Treasure Planet to me are Hunchback of Notre Dame and Lilo and Stitch. Treasure Planet is a movie that I like so much, it's hard to describe. And if no one else is going to talk about why this film is so damn amazing, I guess I have a job to do, right? However, we have to talk about something before we get into why this film is so stellar. Once again, this isn't to call anyone out, but it's growing to be quite a big pet peeve with me. Whenever I see, literally anyone, and I mean anyone talking about this film on the internet, there is one hang-up that comes over and over again that hampers the person talking about its experience with the film. It comes along the lines of,
why are people traveling through space in old-timey Victorian pirate ships?
To put it in other words, a lot of people find the setting an anachronistic mishmash. So, let me take you back in time.
In the far-off year of the 1960s, this little thing called science fiction was really becoming the bee's knees in serious literature, inspired by these newfangled things called computers. As the 1980s approached, they seemed to be taking over the world. Like the commies, it was easy to imagine that they just get bigger and better, and by the far-off future year of 2020, people would be able to modify their body with cybernetic implants, and put these big talking toasters in their brains. However, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. They imagined a dystopian world where corporations controlled your every move, like the commies. Luckily for us, their nightmares never came true. There's a lot less neon in our day-to-day reality. You see, one of the unfortunate habits of science fiction writers, they like to assume the technology improves. The culture stays in a stasis. While they could foresee that robots and technology would become more important to the everyday lives of everyday people, they never saw hairstyle and fashion progressing past 1985, like the commies. This became something that a young man in Minnesota dubbed cyberpunk. And it was a style that persisted long after the synthwave era passed, something that creators, both brilliant and not-so-brilliant, harkened back to in a concept called retro-futurism, the electro-swing of literature. It's a style that was expanded a few years later when people began to question what it'd be like if oil never replaced the steam engine, something that a man in California dubbed steampunk as a joke, believe it or not. After this, retrofuturism became a genre all of itself, when one of these writers asked themselves what a person in the past would imagine that their future would look like. It's something that took over bookstores across the country and expanded outward to every other medium. Cars, airships, and even giant fucking mechs in Legend of Korra or Cast in the Sky must be dieselpunk. Nuclear obsession taking over Fallout must be atom punk. Genetic engineering pushing humans into disaster, as in Bioshock, must be biopunk. This is a message from the people who have seen more than one subgenre of science fiction, who is in no way a subsidiary of the CIA.
Sorry about that. Like I said, it's just a pet peeve, because it really, really annoys me that Treasure Planet's chosen genre seems to be what most people pick on when they criticize the film. In my view, it's like criticizing the Avengers because it's a superhero film, or Frozen because it's a princess film. It's perfectly fine if you don't like the genre, but it's not something that you can hold against the film. So to answer the age-old question, why is everyone in old-timey boats in space? Treasure Planet was written by Robert Louis Stevenson in 1881, almost 100 years before man walked on the moon. The first airplane wasn't even flown until 1903. You know what people knew about space travel in the 1800s? Nothing, because space travel wasn't even something that was considered outside of fantasy back then. They had no clue that space was a vacuum, and they thought that it was filled with a liquid called aether, and they described space as a giant ocean of aether, something that Treasure Planet updates to Ethereum, which is another term that you've probably heard of before. Some people call Treasure Planet steampunk, which is a bit of a misnomer as well. It's got a lot of future technology, but I don't quite agree that it's steampunk. It's definitely steampunk adjacent, as it takes reference from the Victorian era, which was the age of steam, but the technology that we see in the movie isn't really powered by steam. You know, it doesn't have the vents, the valves, and the gears. The ship that they fly on, the RLS Legacy, is powered by solar sails, which is just fucking brilliant, considering that solar sails are actually a real thing. Treasure Planet is more or less the definition of a retro-futuristic piece. If you went back in time and talked to Robert Louis Stevenson himself and asked him about what he imagined space travel to be like, he would probably describe it like it's portrayed in the movie, with a few more additions that came from later discoveries like supernovas or black holes, and things he couldn't possibly have had a concept of at the time, like cyborgs. Yes, I know that this was a bit of a tangent, but it was a necessary tangent because, like I said, from what I've heard, this is people's biggest hang-up with the movie, at least in the modern era. And it really annoys me when people hold a work's genre against it, because I've been at the receiving end of that quite a lot. In my opinion, the only time you can really hold a genre against a work is when it fails to do interesting things with its chosen genre, or it portrays its genre badly. And does Treasure Planet fall into either of those traps? Are you daft? Look at this shit! Treasure Planet is known as the last hurrah for American 2D animation, and that doesn't have to be a negative thing. It's a hurrah. This movie looks astronomical. Of the Disney Animated Canon, this might just be my favorite film visually. One mistake that I've been making in this video is that I've been separating 2D animation and 3D animation, when Treasure Planet was built from the ground up to be a blend of both 3D and 2D styles. Since the Black Cauldron, Disney has been integrating CGI into many of their films to give things enhanced weight and depth, a technique they most likely stole from Don Bluth, as it was a major staple in most of his works. Things like the Cave of Wonders from Aladdin and many of the shots in Notre Dame and Hunchback were CGI, as well as the room during Belle's iconic dance in her iconic dress. In the Renaissance era, this was used sparingly. Big scenes had CGI integration, ones where you needed a lot of detail and extra depth. But with, I want to say Atlantis, the floodgates opened wide, and Treasure Planet built on all of these previous experiences and the updated technology. What they're able to do with CGI in this film is nothing short of breathtaking. CGI has a habit of aging poorly, and you can see that in some places with this film, like the ships on the spaceport look like they're from a PS1 Final Fantasy game, and the space whales are definitely dated, but those moments are few and far in between. Like, between that, you've got things like the nebulas and the interworkings of the RLS legacy. The CGI integration here just gives it an extra grandness. The treasure thereafter looks so much better. But the best CGI is probably on Silver's cyborg parts. They've aged incredibly well considering the time that this film came out on. And they're integrated so perfectly that many people might not even know that they're CGI. Because he's part CGI, he's able to move in motions that would be several pains in the ass to do with 2D animation, with all of those workings and connected parts. Even the sails get this extra bit of beauty because of the CGI blending. Right from the start of the movie, we can see that we're in for a visual treat with the sky surfing scene that just shows off the technology and the art style of this film. Just from the animation alone, retrofuturism is a perfect genre fit. It's a fusion of an old world, that being the world of 2D animation, and being excited of the prospects of the future with CGI. Most of the robotics in the film we see are 3D, and that's another thing that helps the visual style not clash. While CGI does tend to age poorly, there's an exception for, well, machines, which CGI was almost always great at rendering, because they're allowed to be more simplistic and, more importantly, more stylized than human characters. And if they look mechanical, well, they're supposed to. If they tried to CGI biological creatures for this film, it wouldn't look so good, which is why the space whales have some of the poorest CGI of the film. But because they only use it primarily for the tech, it helps create Treasure Planet's own unique style, and becomes more than the sum of its parts. While the human characters are drawn in a typical Disney style, you're not going to confuse a screenshot from this film with any other. Yeah, seeing the ship from afar kind of looks like it belongs more in the video game than the movie, but this movie has such a strong sense of aesthetics that you just don't care. Every single scene in this film is a delight to watch on the visuals alone. Treasure Island is a grand adventure, and Treasure Planet feels grand. And because it takes place in space, what they put on screen is so much more creative than you get out of a straightforward adaptation of Treasure Island. And I suppose that's the other big thing here. People tend to ask why they didn't just make a straightforward adaptation of Treasure Island, like they did during the Renaissance period of making straightforward adaptations of fairy tales and literature. And I guess I have an opinion on that, ignoring the fact that Disney already made a straightforward adaptation of Treasure Island. Honestly, the past few years has kind of reshaped what I believe about remakes and adaptations, now that, everything is a remake, especially with very, very old works. Alice in Wonderland, I think, is another good example, especially because Disney has made 2 adaptations of that book. Well, they've made 3, but there's only 2 that people actually remember these days. And Alice in Wonderland can really help solidify my point here. One that is straightforward, the animated version, that is mostly book loyal, and one that is a much different departure, the live-action version. Today, most people feel that the animated version is better, but that's not what I'm talking about. My question is, how much would you like the live-action Disney version of Alice in Wonderland if it was exactly the same as the animated version? My guess? Not that much, because I have evidence in the name of the live-action Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King. The more that these Disney live-action remakes walk the exact same steps of their originals, the less respect that they seem to get. They have less staying power. There's less point to them. How accurate to the source material should a work be? Especially if the work is very old, like more than 100 years old. Because, here's a funny thing. A 100% perfect, straightforward adaptation of Alice in Wonderland, with everything being book accurate, like line for line, would not be well received in the modern era. Or at least, not as well as it would have been when the book first came out. Because a lot of Alice in Wonderland belongs to a different time. A lot of people don't know this, but the book was actually satire, lampooning many actual people at the time. The Queen of Hearts was a caricature of Queen Victoria, and the King of Hearts, Prince Albert. And the book kind of role-reversed how people saw them, which is something that you can't really translate to the here and now, unless you change up the original work and satirize someone new. I mean, you could do things as straightforward as possible, but who these days is looking for satire on Queen Victoria, a person who died over 100 years ago? Modern times have modern ideas which lead to modern interpretations, which help these stories survive through changing eras. A straightforward adaptation of Hamlet needs to be translated to be enjoyed by a modern audience. An adaptation like The Lion King holds up strongly today and is well remembered and well liked by today's modern audiences. Someday someone is going to make a better, more faithful adaptation of Alice in Wonderland that becomes a cultural phenomenon, and the original Disney animated version will probably be forgotten. However, Tim Burton's unique interpretation of the source material will survive a lot longer, even if it's more flawed. Sometimes making a deviation will give you, yes, a very clunky mess. As an alternative, though, sometimes you get American McGee's Alice, which uses the themes and the assets of Alice in Wonderland to change up the genre and bring it to an entirely new perspective. If Treasure Planet was a straightforward retelling of Treasure Island, it would probably be a more well-received film, but it wouldn't be special. It would be another remake of Treasure Island, and it would probably get overshadowed by Disney's other pirate-themed adventure that would spring up just a few years later, Pirates of the Caribbean. When someone takes an old work like this and says, hey, this will make a good horror or a good sci-fi, it can mean that the creators have a certain kind of passion that wouldn't come from your typical work. And the creators really wanted to do something here. And they painstakingly and passionately brought this work to life. And if you could say nothing else, Treasure Planet is a passionate film, in a way that most Disney films aren't. And I'm not just talking about the 16 years the creators John Musker and Roger Clements tried getting it made. It really is a Disney film unlike any other. You know that age-old trope where the Disney character only has one parent? There are over 50 movies in the Disney Animated Canon, and there are only 9 where both parents are alive in the film from beginning to end. And it never ever seems to matter. Oh, we might have a line of dialogue where the Sultan says that Jasmine's mother would have been so proud of her, or that Buck Cluck says the Chicken Little's mother was a better parent than he was, but it's always nothing more than arbitrary, because it's a cheap way that kids' movies do to try to enhance the relationship between a child and a parent, without actually doing any creative work. It's an easy choice. Where it becomes a storytelling issue is that it never seems to affect the characters in any meaningful way, in just about any of the Disney films. Most of the time, the dead parent isn't even mentioned. Do you know Ariel's mother's name? Or Jasmine's mother? Or Chicken Little's mother? No, you don't. Treasure Planet feels like a response to this Disney cliché, even though Treasure Planet is one of the 9 that I mentioned where the parents are alive from beginning to end. The main character is Jim Hawkins, and his father doesn't die in the film. He fucks off, and God, the last way you could ever describe it is arbitrary. In the prologue, we see that Jim is a relatively happy kid, but as the film actually gets going, we see that he's now a brooding, delinquent teen because something happened.
Jim, look at me. It's been hard enough keeping this place afloat by myself without you going...
Mom, it's no big deal. There was nobody around. Those cops just won't get off my...
Yeah, while there might not be much steam in this movie, they definitely didn't leave out the punk. After the skydiving scene, the first thing we learn about Jim is that he's violated his probation and is one misstep away from juvenile hall. Early in the movie, Jim overhears that his mother is more than desperate because of this troubled kid that she can barely handle. Jim isn't a bad kid, but he's clearly misguided. Definitely not your typical Disney protagonist, and we get to see why. During the movie's theme song, I'm Still Here, we get shots back to Jim's past, and we saw that he was a good kid. But even before his father leaves, we see that he was apathetic towards his family. We never hear the guy's name in the film or see his face, which is a brilliant move that puts it in contrast to all of the other Disney films where we don't get to see the dead parents or hear their name, for no real reason except that the movie didn't want to waste time on another character design. However, what we do see is that one day that Jim wakes up and sees his father leaving on an airship, never to be seen again. Everyone talks about Bambi's mom or Simba's dad, but Christ, this right here is the saddest loss of a parent in any Disney movie. By the way, none of this was in the actual Treasure Island book. People complain about Jim because, quote-unquote, he broods, which was a far too typical character type of that era after The Matrix decided that everything needed to be all dark trench coats, and Blink-182 decided that any emotions should be over the top and delivered in a nasally whine. But a character brooding is understandable when they've gone through legitimate hardship. One of the most memorable moments of the film is when Jim is tasked with securing the lifelines as the ship goes by a black hole. One of the minor villains, Scroop, sabotages Jim, and the first mate, Mr. Arrow, gets flung into the black hole, which is probably the literal worst way to die. We don't have this moment where everyone is blaming Jim like you'd get in most films. No, Jim doesn't even get punished, at least on screen. The punishment comes from within. He thinks that he was responsible for this. After a period of trying so desperately to get his life back on track, he finally feels that he's actually doing something, actually making something of himself, and then this happens. A mistake that has cost someone their life. Then Silver gives Jim this amazing speech.
No, you listen to me, James Hawkins. You got the makings of greatness in you, but you gotta take the helm and chart your own course. Stick to it, no matter the squalls. And when the time comes, you get the chance to really test the cut of your sails and show what you're made of. Well, I hope I'm there, catching some of the light coming off you that day.
And I guess that brings us to Silver. He is the best character in the movie, and the best villain in Disney history. No, I'm serious. Fuck Frollo, Hades, Bowler Hat Guy, Scar, Jafar, and Chernabog. Silver is, at the very least, my favorite Disney villain. One of my favorite of all time. It's not because of his song, despite being a pirate he doesn't sing. It's not because of his motivation, he just wants treasure, and it's not because of how evil his deeds get. His on-screen kill count isn't something to brag about. No, Silver is the best villain because he has something that no other Disney villain has. Which was kind of a shock to the system when I realized this. John Silver from Treasure Planet is the only Disney villain that actually has an arc. I mean, at least with the Pixar films, we get things like Syndrome. We see who he was, we see an inciting incident, and then we see who he becomes later, with all of the actual development off screen. That's not what I call an arc. That's just a backstory. Barring that, we have Hans, who is one person, and then he's another person with no development on or off screen. Silver is one person at the start of the movie, and another person at the end of the movie, and we get to see every single second of that transformation. Honestly, he's like a twisted best villain in reverse. No, I'm not spoiling anything here. The movie makes it perfectly clear that Silver is a villain. The pirate Bones, with a map to Treasure Planet, reveals that the cyborg is someone to be aware of. We get a glimpse of him before he burns down the inn. And he has a very unique silhouette as well. You're not going to mistake him for anyone else. And if that's not enough, we see him talking to his pirate cohorts, planning a mutiny from the beginning. This movie makes a heavy usage of dramatic irony. There's nothing in the movie pretends that the audience doesn't know. We know that Silver is the villain from the beginning. We know that it wasn't Jim's fault that Mr. Arrow died. One thing I respect is how much this movie does respect its audience. And because this film isn't playing the stupid, oops, he was a bad guy all along shit, the film taps into something that no other Disney film and no other Disney villain does. Jim is tasked with basically being assistant to Silver, and while Silver does save Jim from being gored by pirates, we see that it was basically done so they didn't blow their cover. Silver plans on keeping Jim from being suspicious by working him to the bone, and during this period, they start to bond. Genuinely. Remember in Frozen how Hans was smiling under the boat when he fell in the water? Even though he had no reason to be smiling because he wanted to take over the kingdom and he thought that nobody can see him there and he was a bad guy all along. Contrast that with Silver smiling when Jim has fallen asleep, but no one but his pet is looking at him. This is because he is actually changing as a character, and you can see their bond growing. This is made especially poignant once again during the song I'm Still Here, which contrasts Jim's relationship with his birth father and Silver, who becomes Jim's father figure through the film. But this road isn't a one-way street. The pirates are basically planning on killing or at least marooning everyone on that ship, Jim included. And Silver is quick to tell his companions that he doesn't give a crap about Jim and has been bullshitting him this whole time, which is just as believable because from the start we know that he is up to no good and he has the plans to do several evil deeds. He is a liar. It creates a tension that is unique to this film. Whenever Silver has a gun aimed at Jim, you never know what's going to happen, even if he has a perfect aim, because you don't know how honest Silver has been and about what. The relationship between these two make this movie. And if you've had a tumultuous relationship with any of your parents, this movie will hit you harder than any other. I can't straight up say that Jim Hawkins is my favorite protagonist like I can say that Silver is my favorite villain, but I can say that this is my favorite dynamic between the hero and the villain. Honestly, Hunchback of Notre Dame and Tangled could have taken a few notes from this film with the character having a parent-child relationship with the villain. When Silver does villainous things, it hurts Jim a lot more than a plasma rifle ever could. After losing his father, he's got this guy he's grown to like as a parental figure, turning out to be this villainous sod. The movie pulls absolutely no punches. And even at points when Jim realizes that Silver isn't the best kind of guy, he still wants to see him as a father figure. The other characters definitely hold up as well. Mr. Arrow's a bit straight-laced to make a strong impact, but the other two big ones are Amelia and Doppler, a cat person and a dog person respectively. Each of them are a special kind of fun and charming. Doppler is a scientist, and they could have portrayed him as straight-laced as well, but he's very excited to be on this adventure, even more than Jim, and in fact convinces his mother to let them go. He has his awkward moments, but the movie avoids making the misstep of having the scientist be an incompetent buffoon. He could be clumsy, but when the moment comes to it, he's incredibly capable. There's a charm to him. He's not an idiot, which considering the time period, hell, even considering today, is actually a major step in a positive direction. Speaking of capable, we also have Amelia, a strong, badass female character. No, not a strong, badass female character TM, like you'd find in the 2010s gender swap movie remake, an actually strong, badass female character. She's captain of the Legacy and is very capable. Not Mary Sue capable, but someone who is respected and great in her field. She's a strong leader, but she's not a stick in the mud either. Early in the film, we see that she has a sarcastic wit about her, which she masks with larger words. Although if she thinks you're stupid, she'll go more monosyllabic for you. And here's a fun thing, she's actually allowed to have fucking emotions! Like, the one mistake that creators tend to make when they try to make a strong, badass female character TM is that they try to give them what are only seen as typical male values. The relevant one here being stoicism. So, you have these humorless individuals who don't even show a shred of sadness, because that'd be too feminine. When Arrow dies, Amelia acts like a captain who has lost her friend and colleague, one she held close. She doesn't sob, but just from expression you can see that she is distraught. She gives some parting words, gets everyone to work, and then she goes to solitude, which is very human. It's a strong character. It's actually very surprising for this era. At this time, most media was focused on making girls super badass and guys all idiotic doofuses. Like, this movie came out at the same time as Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and one of those things those movies are criticized for is taking all of Ron's clever moments and the times where he actually does something and giving them to Hermione, just to make her a more appealing and a role model-y character. Even when one of the guys was supposed to be a scientist, they'd still make him a doofus compared to even regular, everyday, average female characters. You'd see this dynamic a lot in kids' cartoons. Like, the girls were always portrayed as smarter and more capable. Even in something like Jimmy Neutron. Jimmy Neutron, boy genius, gets outsmarted a bunch of times by Cindy Vortex. Regular, everyday girl. Doppler has moments where he shines. Amelia has moments of weakness. They complement each other as a team in the film. Then there are the comic relief characters. First, we have Morph, this pink shape-shifting blob thing. I actually don't have much to say about him. He's not the best animal companion in a Disney film, but I've seen worse in a Disney film. Looking at you, hey. Also, I just realized this, but Morph changes into other things. As in, he parrots other things. Pirates. That's actually clever. The one that might turn more people off is Ben. Ben is the most annoying character in the movie. I think everyone can agree on that one. Here's the thing though, I don't know why more Disney films don't do this, but Ben is not introduced until an hour into the movie. Seriously, can more movies do this? Like, I get that all kids movies for no particular reason just absolutely have to have that one absolutely annoying character that no one likes, for toys I guess. But can we all just relegate them to the last 20 minutes before the film ends? In all seriousness though, Ben is a lot less annoying than I remembered him being. He's still not pleasant, but he avoids a few missteps that a lot of bad comic relief does. He's not very helpful, but for the most part, he's not actively detrimental to the heroes. Now, the only real issue that he has as a character is that he's loud. Like, literally loud. He shouts all of his lines.
Whoa! Hello? You know, Jimmy, I was just thinking... It's all flooding back! All my memories! Right up until Flint pulled my memory circuit so I could never tell anybody about his booby trap!
But even with all of that, he doesn't detract from this beautiful, unique masterpiece of a film. While Treasure Planet took 4 years to make, it was a passion project for 16. The creators had been pitching this film since 1985, but were rejected by both Eisner and Katzenberg repeatedly. Keep in mind, the directors of this film were the directors behind Little Mermaid and Aladdin, which basically revived Disney into prominence. And they pitched Treasure Planet after those films, Little Mermaid and Aladdin. They were only able to get the green light by getting a descendant of Disney himself on board. They negotiated their contracts so they could make this film after they made one more commercially successful film. At the time, that was Hercules. If you like Hercules, the directors wanting to make Treasure Planet is why that film exists at all. They have gone on record saying that the only reason that they made Hercules was so that they can make Treasure Planet. These two animation greats were ready to get their dream to air. They had everything they needed. Then Disney sabotaged the film. Maybe not intentionally. When Disney did things like put the fucking robot as the main advertising draw, which once again does not appear until an hour into the film, tried selling the movie as a comedy, made a trailer that was basically made to pander, and on top of that, released the film against Harry Potter and the Chamber of fucking Secrets. What am I supposed to think? Occam's razor states that you should never attribute to malice, which can be better explained by stupidity, but stupidity has its limits. Releasing your movie against a Harry Potter film in the early 2000s, that's like releasing your movie against the first theatrical run of The Empire Strikes Back. Disney, this kind of arrogance is why DreamWorks exists.
Sometimes plans go astray. You give up a few things, chasing a dream.
John Musker and Roger Clements didn't direct another film until the end of the decade with Princess and the Frog, and that was after Eisner resigned from the company. After that, they directed Moana in 2016 and haven't directed a movie since. Sabotage or not, Treasure Planet was the victim of unfortunate circumstance that it definitely did not deserve. Honestly, both then and now, but it's definitely gaining an audience. After I did my Disney tier list, I was surprised at how many people wanted me to make this video, and I think that's a good sign. Like, while us internet critics haven't really been speaking as fondly of this film as we have other films that came out in Disney's experimental era, from what I can read in the comments and the general internet consensus, I feel good things are coming for this film. It hasn't quite gotten its resurgence like Atlantis or The Emperor's New Groove, but if those winds on the Ethereum Sea are blowing the way that I think they are, it will.
Was it worth it?
I'm hoping it is, Jimbo.